Hello, world. Welcome to the Shannon Joy Show.
Hey guys, welcome to the Shannon Joy Show. My name is Jeff Dornik. Some of you guys probably know me just because I've been a guest on the show, guest hosted a couple of times as well. But it's an honor to fill in for Shannon as she's out on a trip, and I will be guest hosting today as well as tomorrow. Have a couple of really awesome shows lined up for you tomorrow. My good friend Karen Kingston is back on, so we're going to have some really interesting conversations about everything going on with HHS and mRNA jabs and just all that kind of stuff. Dive into all the details there. So make sure you guys are tuning in tomorrow with my conversation with Karen Kingston. But before we do get started today, I just kind of want to preface this conversation that we're going to be having, just with I think what we're seeing right now in the overall landscape of big tech and social media and everything is we're seeing Elon really becoming a very big driving force with the development of artificial intelligence. He used to be very kind of anti AI. We need to put a pause on it. Now he's gung ho and probably outpacing anybody and everybody else out there when it comes to the mainstream artificial intelligence platforms. And what's crazy is I think I just made a post on X and on Pickaxe last night, but just how Elon's kind of becoming a mad scientist to a certain degree. And this is just my opinion. But when you think about it, I mean, he's coming out with Optimus employed diners around the country where all the waiters and waitresses and I believe chefs and cooks are going to be Optimus robots. It's getting kind of crazy. Then he also announces that Baby Grok is coming out, to where they're going to have artificial intelligence for minors, for kids. I don't know about you guys, but I would definitely prefer to have a human being make my food, and I would definitely prefer not to have my kids dialed in with an artificial intelligence specifically dedicated to children. Sorry, that's just my opinion. My kids going nowhere near that. But I think in a greater detail as well is one of the things that we're really seeing a lot of is just how AI is permeating everything. And I think that everybody kind of has this caricature of what artificial intelligence looks like and what artificial intelligence actually is. If you listen to a lot of people and they talk about AI, one of the things that they continually talk about is how it can be this neutral platform, about how it can be this technology that can be this moral arbiter of truth because it doesn't have personal vendettas, personal opinions, personal agendas to go along with it, and that this can be the path to actually having truth. And one of the things that I think that we really have to be aware of is that AI is only as good as its sources. AI is only as good as its programmer. AI is only as good as the way that it's actually made. And I think it can also be very easily manipulated. It can also be very easily programmed in order to manipulate us. And that's one of those things that we have to be very careful about. And that's also with the understanding that, look, AI can be a useful tool as well. For a lot of people, especially small businesses, entrepreneurs, people that are struggling to get by and figuring out how to hustle and all that. So it's gonna be really today's gonna be a really interesting conversation as we kind of dive into that and a bunch of other things as well. But make sure as well, for those of you guys that don't know, I do have a social media platform. It's called Pickaxe. We're a very human centered social media platform. We're not leaning into AI. We're leaning into human creativity, your own thoughts, your own ideas. We're weeding out all the AI bots and anonymous accounts and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys want to check that out, you guys can go to pickaxe.com. You guys can sign up today. We're going to be rolling out an app here in the next few weeks. You guys can follow myself. You guys can follow Ex American News. You guys can follow Shannon Joy all over there, as well as our guest today, who's Rachel Alexander, who we're going to bring on here in just one second. But make sure you guys are signing up for pickaxe.com today. And then that way you guys are ready to rock and roll once we drop the app. And this is going to change the way that we do social media. So make sure you guys are doing that. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and bring on our guest for today. It's a very, very good friend of mine. I've known for years, actually. Rachel Alexander. Rachel, welcome to the show. I'm glad we can sit down and chat again.
Thanks. I always love coming on your show, Jeff.
No, yeah, no, it's always fun. It was totally random and fun to run into you in Arizona at the RFK Jr. announcement when he suspended his campaign and I'm like, that's a small world. I mean, I guess I could have assumed it was Arizona, but it was fun to run into you there as well.
Right. Well, you were going with RFK at the time, and I was Trump. So, we didn't really think we would run into each other. But when they both converged, I mean, it happened.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it was interesting yesterday because I know, and for the people that don't know your background, you were the former Maricopa County elections attorney. Like all this stuff inside and out. And for me, following a lot of the election fraud claims and everything, you were one of my main sources I would always look to because there's so much misinformation and bad information out there, and I feel like you actually understood it, but also was reporting on it properly. So I always knew I could get down to the truth, following you. But I think also on top of that, I think what's really interesting is that you got into this Twitter debate with Grok, and I'm following this thing, and I'm like, Rachel totally wiped the floor and basically beat Grok in an X debate. And I'm like, and it's still every time I mention it on Twitter, Grok responds and tells me that you're wrong, even though you definitively proved it. Explain to people what actually happened here and what even started this conversation with Grok.
So, I guess I'm like a dog with a bone or a Pavlovian dog when it comes to people who want to tag Grok and ask it about election wrongdoing because I see it parroting the MSM and it makes me so mad. And I know how to refute all of their garbage lies by now because what they do, the MSM just ignores the all of the court cases and all of the evidence that contradict the MSM's position on election wrongdoing. So I'm able to cite all of this stuff that Grok is not drawing from because Grok just draws from the MSM. Occasionally it'll draw from Fox News or something, and you can tell it to draw from conservative sources. But even then, it's not very good. And I'm just a local reporter for the most part, so it's definitely not tapping into articles from Arizona Sun-Times, even if I tell it to tap from conservative sources. So I see these people tagging Grok, and Grok is just parroting, this low-level, MSM spin, which is so full of holes that it's simple for me to just take 5 minutes and just refute it. And so I started going around and around with Grok, and Grok was so insulting to me, it just incited me even more because I sent Grok a list of the 92 election cases that the wonderful, John Droz put together. And then I expanded on those 92 election cases. And I said, Grok, why don't you look at this and then answer me about whether there was wrongdoing in the 2020 election? And Grok ignored me, did not even look at my list of 92 cases, and came back and parroted the whole 65 project thing that there were only about 65 cases and we lost them all on the merits. So that was the gist of it. And the funny thing is, Jeff, it's like I went to bed 2 nights ago and I thought it was over with. No, I woke up yesterday morning, it was still going. So I kept going yesterday morning too.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's crazy to me is that again, kind of like what I was saying in the intro, is that a lot of people have this idea that Grok is absorbing all the information and aggregating everything and then funneling it together and then giving us basically its assessment of the reality. But I think to me, what your conversation with this AI robot actually proved is that it's pulling from very specific sources, and it's ones that a lot of us conservatives have tuned out as not being reliable. Mainstream media in general, not reliable. They push propaganda. They push a particular narrative. And so the fact that Grok, again, Elon Musk's supposed, free speech platform and, pushing Grok and XAI and all of that is still pulling from mainstream outlets. And then all the conservatives are jumping all over it as if it's kind of like this new arbiter of truth and it's anti-woke and all of that. And you're just sitting here and you're like, basically just destroyed it with the actual facts and you corrected it and it still would not correct itself. That to me, what was the really interesting thing. You were providing receipts and it still would not correct itself.
And it's so interesting watching these other people talk about it. One person responded back to me and said that they spent hours teaching Grok on election fraud, and they eventually convinced it. But the problem is Grok just forgets all that stuff. So you can spend hours and hours in this debate, And 2 hours later, Grok's going to be back to where Grok started. And the thing is people are excited because they're like, okay, Elon Musk is going to make Grok not as woke. Every few days I ask Grok who's a better president. Would Trump have made a better president or Kamala Harris? And Grok dutifully says Trump. So that's good. That's been fixed. But in all these other areas, election, wrongdoing is just one of them. Grok is a complete mess, and there is some irony because Elon Musk just posted when I was in the middle of my debating Grok, he just posted how the New York Times is fake news. But what is Grok doing? It's going and parroting back the New York Times to me as a source for election information on wrongdoing. And so I posted maybe we should rename Grok AI to the New York Times AI because that's pretty much what it's acting like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think, and I've even kind of played around with it too, and even dealing with, and I know you deal with a lot with the election fraud stuff. I deal with a lot with, obviously, with like, COVID and the vaccines and all that kind of stuff. And it's doing the exact same thing with a lot of that as well. Again, it's not as bad as let's say Open AI or Chat GPT, but it's still pushing a lot of the mainstream narratives. And I think that's what's so concerning is I think so many people have kind of become fanboys of Elon, and he can do no wrong. And we're going to support Grok, we're going to support X. And I'm not just sitting here just saying we need to rail on the guy constantly, but we also have to be aware that we can't just rely on these technologies to feed us the truth, because it's so easy in order for it to push propaganda, push particular narratives. And I think that your conversation with this AI in general really proved that. I think it was very, very explicit. I think as well. Now, with for people that aren't familiar with this kind of conversation of the difference between the 90 something cases for this versus the 60 something cases, explain to people like what you're talking about, and for people to understand.
Okay, so the 65 Project, that's that notorious group that was founded to go after conservative attorneys and get them disbarred. They nicknamed themselves the 65 Project because they claimed that there were 65 election cases from 2020 and that none of those cases were successful. But the wonderful John Droz and his team of statistical PhDs who look into election fraud looked and found, 30 almost 30 more cases that were from 2020, and a lot of those were decided on the merits, and they were decided in favor of Trump or the GOP plaintiffs. And so I went and fleshed those out in detail in a very, 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 very long Word document, and I basically showed things like where there were county clerks in Iowa who were mailing out pre-populated voter forms, and so that was ruled illegal, and the judge stopped them from doing that. And these were all kinds of easy ways that you could commit voter fraud if you had these things going on in the background, like mailing out these pre-populated forms. So these are all these cases that Grok does not talk about because the mainstream media doesn't write about them. I mean, the only reason I even know about those cases is because of John Droz. There's no media writing about these cases. They just ignore them and they pretend like they don't exist. It's like a vacuum.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this has been one of the things that I've said about, especially about election fraud and all of that from the very beginning, is I think a lot of people, and this is one of the reasons why I appreciate the way that you've reported on it, is I feel like a lot of people, they're looking for like the smoking gun as like one major thing that rigged the entire election, whether it was the machines or it was this or it was that, and I'm like, it was like everything. It was so many little things all together that were just so awful, that were just so bad. It wasn't just one particular thing that was behind it. Even just in Arizona, there were so many different issues. It wasn't like it was just one issue that you fix this one thing, it'll fix the entire thing. And I think that that's where guys like Dinesh D'Souza, who I really liked his documentary. Was it whatever 3,000 Mules or whatever it was, and like it was a good documentary. But I think to act as if that one thing was the smoking gun that turned the election, I think is a little naive. It was all these different things. Like you said, it was, pre-filled out ballots. It was this, it was that, it was the other thing, all pieced together. That was the complicated issue here.
Right. And, since I've been writing about this election wrongdoing so extensively now for several years, I've seen all the different ways they do it. And I do believe there is one smoking gun in one of the states. I really am not comfortable saying it on your show because the one person who, pointed this out publicly got sued and lost a verdict of millions and millions of dollars. So the irony is the one real smoking gun of the 2020 election nobody can talk about. And I'll hint about it on X, and people can figure it out, but you can't even say it when you do see the smoking gun. So we're stuck trying to show all this background cheating that's going on behind the scenes, which is impossible to do because these corrupt rhinos in office will not turn over public records requests. I mean, I just finished an article yesterday about another situation where we have, this run back election systems in Maricopa County, our third party vendor. They would not turn over video of the loading dock where they load and unload ballots, even though Cyber Ninjas, which was another third party election contractor, a court ordered them to, saying, because you're working with the government, you are acting like a governmental entity, so you have to turn over all your stuff. So when the good guys do it, they're forced to do public records requests, but when in my opinion, the bad guys run back, they get out of it. And so what happened then was, our wonderful Senator Wendy Rogers and another legislator, Alex Culloden, election attorney, they negotiated a memorandum of understanding with Runbeck to turn over the video. And guess what? The corrupt rhino Maricopa County supervisors would not approve the memorandum of agreement. And so are we the people, Arizona, which had filed the public records request in the first place, they sued. And of course, the judge agreed, with Runbeck and disregarded the precedent with Cyber Ninjas and would not make them turn over the video. So nobody's ever seen this video and nothing ever happens. And there's only a couple of reporters in the entire country writing about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is also a perfect example of kind of the problem of the way that the establishment works in to a certain degree is they stall everything, they drag everything on, they deny, and then you get years down the road and they're like, just let it go. That's in the past. Stop worrying about it. And and I think that that's the concern that I think a lot of us are having right now of whether you're talking about the Epstein files or whether you're talking about all these different things that I think that a lot of us were promised. It's like, I think a lot of these things were promised to be disclosed right away in the first 100 days. Day number one, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And it feels like now we're getting kind of gaslit. And I feel like this is kind of the standard operating procedure. We're seeing this when it comes to all these, challenges to the elections. We're seeing this from the DOJ and the intelligence agencies and all that. And it's almost like they just hope that we're just going to give up and go away, I think.
You have really hit on something. And since I've been a local political journalist here and know everybody at this point around here, I can tell you there is one of the most powerful politicians in the state. This person admitted to me that they have been telling other politicians and key politicos not to talk about election wrongdoing. They're putting pressure on them. There is one of the most well-known grassroots activists in Arizona who's doing the exact same thing, and he's even doing it more publicly. He's putting posts out there about how we need to not focus on election wrongdoing. We need to move on. Da 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 da. I mean, this is really happening, and these people, what they do, these types of people, they are going based off of public perception and donations. They are thinking, oh, okay, well, that low information Republican billionaire out there, they're kind of getting tired of people talking about election wrongdoing. And so they're not going to want to donate. So let's just hush and let's just focus on other things. But as we all know, if you sweep the problem under the rug, they're just going to continue engaging in the election fraud. And but everybody just cares about their pocketbooks and getting reelected. And you've got the same people around Trump putting the same type of pressure on him. But thank God, because Trump knows he was cheated out of the 2020 election, he ain't going to let it go.
Yeah, didn't I see that I think I just saw a headline today that the Trump administration was actually asking several of the key states
9
for all
states.
of their records, right?
That's right. It's part of his election integrity order, which was very broad. And even though rogue district court judges have struck parts of it down, which applies in the states where they sued. So because our alleged AG Chris Mays has sued Trump over everything, all these rogue injunctions are going to apply to Arizona. So, that's going to apply to things like, was it the non-citizens voting? That part has been struck down, but these other parts, like investigating the machines, that has not been struck down, and that is part of Trump's executive order.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's like with all of this, I think that again, this is a systemic thing that I think that we're having to deal with. I think, yeah, like I said earlier, it's like they drag this on, and then they hope that it all goes away. And I feel like the same thing's happening with the COVID jabs to a certain degree, mRNA technology. I think a lot of people, especially in the bigger names and the political consultants and all that, they're like, COVID was in the past. Let's move forward. Let's ignore it. It's like, but if we don't fix the problem, if we don't actually fix the system that allowed this to happen, then guess what? It's going to happen again. And I think that the same thing can be said about the elections. And I think one of the concerns that I have is that, okay, Trump won this last time around. Okay, everybody can kind of opine about why did they let him? Did they not let him? Why they do this? But I think at the very least, it's also a way for them to try to justify the 2020 election. Say, let's see, look, we do free and clear elections. We didn't rig it against Trump. Why are you saying that we did in 2020 if he got in 2024? If the elections are really rigged, then he wouldn't have won this time around. And it's kind of a way that they can actually basically say, like, yeah, guess what? It's not rigged. Move on. And then that way they still have all these tactics, all these things in their back pocket for the future when they decide, what, we need to get the right guy in office.
And we know that they did try to cheat in 2020. They were just unsuccessful because if you look at the numbers, and I created my own graphic out there, if you look at the numbers going from, the 2016 election to the 2020 election to the 2024 election, they bumped up so hugely in both the 2020 and 2024 election that you can tell that there was monkey business going on. So they just didn't count on Get Out the Vote and Turning Point USA and Scott Presler getting so many people to vote on the Republican side that they didn't pad the numbers enough. And especially here in Arizona. I mean, I love the fact Turning Point USA is headquartered here in Arizona. I mean, they're going to keep this state from, cheating too much anymore. But here's what people need to realize, okay? So the Democrats are going to come back and they're going to cheat even bigger and they're going to get back into office. And once they do, once they control the presidency again, you're going to see the prosecution lawfare return. I feel so badly for Pam Bondi, Kash Patel. I mean, all these attorneys and top advisors around Trump. The Democrats are going to prosecute them.
Yeah. Well, and again, this goes into the other big issue that you've been covering a lot, which is the lawfare. And I think, obviously we everybody in Republican media and in Con Inc. basically, they talk about lawfare mostly in regards to Donald Trump and how the government's been weaponized and all the different lawsuits that were thrown against him and all that. But this went way beyond just Trump. I mean, you covered the John Eastman case, very, very extensively. And I think that one of the things that we see is that they use the lawfare and they use these tactics in order to basically scare anybody else from actually talking about the truth. And I feel like you've shown that repeatedly through your reporting.
Yeah, they've mastered it. I was one of the original victims of lawfare years ago, and they've perfected it now because everybody, what they do is they go for the low hanging fruit. So you go for the little people, the people with no power, no money, no connections, and they're easy to take out. I mean, a lot of them, the Jenna Ellises of the world, they'll take plea bargains, to save their own skin and rat out everybody out. And that sets a horrible precedent, but they can then rely on that in the future to take down the bigger dogs. What shocks me about this whole lawfare is the fact that they would come after the most, genius, powerful, wonderful attorney on the right, John Eastman, and take him down. And then the fact that they would go after the most powerful man in the world, Trump, and pretty much take him down with a criminal conviction. Now, thank God he's been able to thwart it and keep going and get elected president. I didn't see that coming. I really thought they were going to destroy him. But so we are able to fight back a little bit, but I still think that they've perfected this to such extent with the legal system, with their control of the legal system, that it's still a real threat. And Trump's not through the woods yet. I mean, they keep coming up with more creative ways to come after him all the time.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that it's not going to end. But that's also when it comes to all of these lawfare cases, that's where I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, number one, we need to figure out how to stop this and make sure that they don't keep doing this. But also from a logistical standpoint and a legal standpoint, it's like how do you actually do that? And that's that's what I've kind of struggled to figure out. How do you stop all of these ridiculous lawsuits from happening? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, the Supreme Court stopping these bogus nationwide injunctions was a huge step in the right direction. And I know there are some bills in Congress that are also going to address these types of things. Like, I know one that I think is actually bipartisan, is where you can only file the lawsuit in the relevant jurisdiction. So, the left can't keep going to Massachusetts to file every freaking lawsuit because they know it's all Democrat judges there. That's the one that irritates me the most. Why is a Democrat judge in Massachusetts getting to decide what Arizona gets to do with our elections? So, that would be a good move. There's other things you can set up, but the problem is, with the gridlock in Congress, how do you get that stuff passed? Number one. And number two, you can't reform the legal system from within because it's so heavily dominated by the left. So, otherwise I would recommend doing things like penalties for frivolous lawsuits and things. But, we already have bar ethics rules against bringing frivolous lawsuits, and they're never enforced to the advantage of conservatives.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It seems like a lot of these, in the way that they're applied, it is very one-sided. And I think that that's kind of what we're dealing with in a whole host of issues. And I think that it's also like one of the things that we've been struggling with any and all lawsuits that come up, challenging big pharma or anything like that in regards to like the COVID jabs and whistleblowers and all that kind of stuff. Is that there's always some sort of loophole that it seems like it protects the establishment, or it protects the big corporation, or it protects the big government, and then it screws the little guy. But then if it's inverted and it's the other way around, then they're not going to provide those same protections to us. And I think that that's the thing, is that there's this double standard in our justice system where there's not equal weights and measures. That again, it's one of those things we have to rectify. But it's a very convoluted and a very, very nuanced thing in order to actually provide a solution.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, look at what happened to all those poor J6ers who ended up in prison versus the violent Antifa riot at Trump's inauguration in 2016. I think that would be 17 then. I mean, that was just insane because those violent Antifa rioters were at least as bad as the Trump rioters, and nothing happened to them. Like, I wrote an article about how I think like a handful served maybe overnight in jail, and then they had like a suspended 30-day sentence that they never really actually had to serve. Like, that's all these guys got. I mean, we are so upside down. And I want to make a good point, because you're kind of bringing up the uniparty here. I always like to say, in regards to the issue of election fraud, I believe the Democrats commit the election fraud. What they do is they recruit hardcore criminals to do it, for the most part. I mean, obviously, they might have a programmer on the inside who's not a hardcore criminal, but for the most part, it's these hardcore criminals doing the absentee ballot fraud and stuff. But it's the rhinos who are looking the other way. They know what's going on. These rhino officials in office, especially Georgia, that seems to be one of the worst states for these rhino election officials. And they're like, hear no evil, see no evil. And because it's too hard to prosecute them for just looking the other way. They can always just say, I didn't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and I think especially we saw that in Georgia, but even with the governor, I think it was, it's like you look the other way, and then they use that in order to go after Trump and all that. So I don't know. There's so many issues with this, and I kind of want to continue this conversation, especially about the uniparty, because I think it's very important, because one of the things that we're seeing right now is that it's like, okay, Trump's in office, and there's all these promises that were made, but the only things that it seems like are actually getting done are by executive order. Nothing's getting passed legislatively. Nothing's actually being implemented, along with those promises. And so, it's one of those things where, okay, are they actually going to follow through with their promises, or is it just going to be a repeat of the first term, where basically they got nothing done, and then they lose the midterms, and then guess what? He gets nowhere. Doesn't get anything actually accomplished. So we'll dive into that. We'll be right back after this break, and then we'll continue our conversation with my good friend Rachel Alexander.
Colonial Metals Group. Get your gold and silver strategy put together today. This is, again, nothing is changing. So what does that mean? It means that we are still in a situation here in the US with the economy. It's like a train barreling down the track, set on fire, 90 miles an hour, with a drunken conductor heading right off a cliff. Like, that's kind of where we are with this economy. And so, especially with the US dollar, our currency, they have taken this as far as they possibly can. Everyone understands this, and this is why gold is now tier 1 status. That's what Ed Dowd was talking about. Gold is money good, meaning you could buy a house with gold. We could see a situation, especially with Texas and Florida now adopting gold and silver as legal tender. That is the first step to their ability to establish a sovereign bank. You have saved your entire life. You're a retiree, and your money is wrapped up in a 401k, IRA, and it's the stock market or even federal government instruments. You have to consider physical gold and silver as a hedge. Doesn't mean you have to go in and go all in on it. It could be a portion, it could be a quarter, less than that, but everyone needs to be hedging right now with physical gold and silver, and also physical gold and silver backing up your retirement. As you guys know, Colonial Metals Group this company is amazing. I trust this company. I know all the primaries. We've been working with them for years, and they take amazing care of this audience. So you're going to want to go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/joy, colonialmetalsgroup.com/joy. See if you qualify for $7,500 in free silver. This is an amazing company. They are not going to give you a pressure sell. They're not going to manipulate. They don't do fear selling in any capacity. They just give you all the information that you need and let you make the decision that is right for you and your family. So colonialmetalsgroup.com/joy.
Hey, we are back, and again, we kicked things off, and it was in the first segment. It was funny because Rachel and I were just talking about how she always talks about lawfare. She talks about media bias, and she talks about election fraud. And we hit all three of those things in the first segment. So we'll continue the conversation, kind of piggybacking off of that. But Rachel, we'll go ahead and bring you back on. But I think one of the interesting things that we were kind of really hitting on at the tail end of that first segment was this kind of like uniparty mentality that's going on. And like you said, you've got the Democrats that probably hire and commit the actual crimes, the fraud, all that kind of stuff. But then you have the Republicans that look the other way. It was interesting because I think during looking back at the 2020 election specifically, and again, you could probably attest to this or talk about this or correct me where I'm wrong, but it felt like there was actually some key locations in key places where it was actually it could have been Republicans that either participated or were more involved than I think that they would be in other areas. It wasn't just like a Democrat thing. It was this uniparty movement, really, in order to keep Trump out of office in the 2020 election. And I think that was one of my concerns, because it's like, Arizona's not flaming blue, Georgia's not flaming blue. And they both had Republican leadership in certain key places in both of those states. And yet, there was that's where some of the worst fraud occurred.
Right. And, the reason we know that these Republicans are rhinos is because the MSM is always holding them up. I mean, constantly. They remind you in every sentence, Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer, a Republican, refused to, turn over, routers and documents to one of these investigative election integrity groups. I mean, they just rub it in our faces, and we all know why there is the uniparty, why we have all these rhinos. I wrote an article for Townhall not too long ago called "Why Rhinos Are Rhinos," and it all comes down to follow the money. These people have got these careers and well-paying gigs, and they don't want to lose them. And in order to keep in those positions, they have to negotiate certain friendships, certain, GOP billionaires funding them. The GOP billionaires can be low information, and so they're scared of things like the voter fraud issue. So that is what is driving these rhinos. And it drives me crazy when, John McCain was one of the worst ones, when they would come out there and they would say, "I'm so principled. That's why I have these positions." No, you are Orwellian. That is the exact opposite of principled, doing what you do for money. I mean, these people they're just scandalous. I have a good friend in Congress who tells me, he's like, "Yeah, I get along with these guys. I have to get along with these guys. But the things I see them do because they're rhinos who are being paid to say or vote, however, it's disgusting. It doesn't, that's all it comes down to." And so when people are like, "Oh, there's so many Republican sellouts," well, there are, but most of them are the ones who are in office in the top positions because they're bringing in the bacon.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Well, and I think I grew up in Arizona, so like I remember as a kid growing up, and my mom always talking about because we'd sit in the car and you listen. My mom would always listen to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity in the car, and that was like our afternoon drive, whatever it is. And I remember my mom always saying, John McCain would always campaign as a conservative, and then he'd get to DC and he would legislate as a Democrat, or at the very least as a middle of the road, wishy-washy, will kind of play both sides of the fence. And I think that that's a lot of times what we see is that you see the Republican Party really, they hold all the cards for if you want to get through the primaries, you have to a certain degree, you have to sell out to the establishment Republicans, except in very rare circumstances. And I think that that's one of the problems that I think we have with our current election system. Forget the election fraud side of things, but even just if we want to fix the Republican Party, we've got to figure out how we can actually have actual primaries where the Republican Party isn't getting involved and putting all their money behind one candidate that's willing to accept all the strings that are attached with the money, and we can actually have a free and fair primary system within the Republican Party to where the people can actually decide, and then the Republican Party gets behind the nominee. But what happens repeatedly over and over and over again is the Republican Party, they get involved, they endorse a candidate right from the get-go, the person who's willing to sell out, they give them basically unlimited advertising and promotion, and then we wonder why we continually have all these ridiculous rhinos get into Congress.
So I have a great answer for that.
Yep.
So, I've been in politics my entire life. I always like to point out that since we weren't allowed to watch TV and movie as children growing up, I read National Review cover to cover beginning about second grade. So I've had this hardwired in me, and I paid so close attention. And I worked on some political campaigns in 2010. And I'll tell you something there about John McCain. But before I say that, actually become a fan of billionaires in politics. And here's why. Because, that problem you're describing, where there's always the Republican Party goes along with the most establishment candidate, that's because of money. That's because they can get all the people to contribute to that candidate. So what happens is when you had Trump come along, hello, you finally had a billionaire candidate who didn't have to report to anyone. He didn't owe anybody. And so he could do what he wants. And that's why he's become, some people say, the best president we've ever had. So I think we need more billionaires to run for office because they can't be controlled. I mean, I know you're not a big fan of Musk, but I mean, the guy does what he wants. He's the richest man in the world. So no one's going to control him. No one's going to tell him what to do. And my other point I wanted to make, though, about John McCain, because I love investigating the rhinos and exposing what happens, especially since I've been in the trenches. So in 2010, I moved completely to political campaigns. I was the director of social media for J.D. Hayworth, for David Schweikert. I chaired the successful Prop 107, which got rid of affirmative action in Arizona. And so I learned a lot that year. And on J.D. Hayworth's campaign, what we discovered was, at that point, the dislike of John McCain was at an all-time high. And so we raised a respectable 3 million, which was pretty decent for that type of Senate race back in 2010. Now you probably need a lot more. Um, but John McCain had $33 million left from running for president. And he was allowed to transfer that and use that in that election. That is so unfair. And he basically bought ads that he played 24/7 around the clock all throughout Arizona, mainly geared at senior citizens. And they all said, build the dang fence. It was such a complete fraud because he'd always voted against illegal immigration bills. And once he easily won re-election due to the 33 million, he went back to voting against illegal immigration bills.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, I'm not surprised by that at all. But I think that, to me, that's one of the most. So there's a couple things that I think we really need to fix. Number one is that you should not be allowed to carry over leftover funds. That's something that I've seen happen repeatedly. If somebody runs for office, a lot of times what they can do is they build up their war chest, and if they're winning in a blowout, or they don't need to spend all their money, they can just save it and then just transfer it over to their next election, which gives a huge advantage to incumbent candidates. And that's a major, major problem. The other side is that this is something that will probably never happen. But in my opinion, we also need to overturn the 17th Amendment as well, and go back to allowing the states to select senators and allow the people to select the representatives, which is the way that our founding fathers intended it. So that way there was actually a check and balance. That way, the state legislators were the ones that were deciding who would represent the states in Senate, and then the people would decide who represents the people in Congress, and then they would then duke it out. That's the whole point of having the two chambers of Congress. Now it's just a popular vote in both. So really, is there really a check and balance? What's the difference except the term limits to a certain degree? But we do have a couple of questions that I kind of want to throw to you that are coming from the audience. And one of the things was, Bill Benz asked if you could explain why Trump never encouraged Trump supporters to watch 2,000 Mules during the rallies. Because I think the argument would be that if that was the smoking gun and that did actually show extensive voter fraud, like Dinesh D'Souza was saying, why wasn't that leaned into and challenged and brought up in court and getting everybody behind that?
Okay, so having been in this field forever and having talked to the players, I've talked to Dinesh, I've talked to True the Vote, that produced the documentary. Here's my assessment, and I could be completely wrong, but this is what I guess is happening. Okay, first of all, when you're, briefing Trump on talking points and you're drafting speeches for him, and I've done this stuff. I've drafted speeches for politicians that I've worked for. I mean, so I know how it goes. I believe a lot of it is hit or miss. If that particular speech maker or advisor does not bring it up, hey, you need to hit this in your talking points. It's one. It could be somebody who doesn't like Dinesh D'Souza, who's one of in Trump's key circle. It could be somebody who had a bad experience with True the Vote. So you've got that aspect going on. Okay. Then the other aspect I think that could be going on is they were really thwarted to try to get a lot of this data to go back and prove all of their assertions about these smartphones being found in these locations. I don't remember, it's been a few years now, but whether it was the government or the private companies, that was thwarting getting them the data. So, there should have been like a follow-up report with charts, showing specifics. And it's probably for privacy reasons. My guess is, they weren't able to get it for privacy reasons. So I think that's why people are like, 2,000 Mules never went anywhere. They didn't have the proof. Well, that's not the full story. The full story is they were not allowed to get further proof. They had they had enough to show us that, yes, it really was occurring. But could they do all the backup? No. And that's what it always comes down to with a lot of these election fraud issues, especially here in Maricopa County. The Maricopa County corrupt supervisors will not turn over routers, data, document. I mean, even the 2022 election, all those ballots have been destroyed. It's been over the 22-month-long, federal requirement to keep them. We can't even go back and investigate the 2022 election anymore.
Yeah, no, well, and I think to even go along with that too is There's very similar tactics that I've seen between what happened with election fraud and what happened with the COVID jabs and challenging, and promoting medical freedom and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is that a lot of the same tactics are used across the board, and that's why, to me, you kind of know it's kind of probably the same people pulling the strings behind the scenes in both of these instances. But I think specifically with this, there's this problem of our elected officials and the people that are in our government don't actually believe that we're a self-governed society in the way that our founding fathers intended, where everything should be transparent. I had Kash Patel on my show, obviously before he became FBI director, and he talked about how, like, basically everything should be unredacted and except for very specific key things. And because, again, we're a government that's we the people, we're the ones, that are self-governing. We're electing people to represent us and do our bidding. There shouldn't be secrets from any of us. So when you have people dealing with the elections and they refuse to actually provide the servers and allow things to be fact checked and all that, to me it makes it feel like a cover up, because they're not willing to be transparent. They're not willing to give us the information. And then we saw the same tactic being used when it came to the COVID jabs. And what's interesting, in both of those, the same talking point was used. The talking point in the mainstream narrative was that there's no documented evidence, or no documented proof, whether it was a study or whether it was a court case that was won. They would use these certain phrases and to make us believe that it's false, when in reality what it was is it just hadn't been proved in a court of law yet. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. And I think that's what we have to continually come back to, is just because it hasn't been quote unquote proven in a peer reviewed study or in a massive court case, it doesn't mean that it's fake, doesn't mean that it's false. It means that it hasn't been proved yet. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
And look at OJ. I mean, our courts are completely flawed, And one of the favorite cases I like to talk about is the defamation case against Fox News, which was the biggest defamation settlement in the history of the country for $787 million, because you had Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and I can't forget his name, but he recently passed away, because they were making statements about election fraud. And what nobody will report, I've only found like maybe one MSM article that even reported this, and it was buried in the article, is how that came about. That came about because the judge in the case, hardcore leftist, maybe he was a rhino. I remember he looked like a bad apple to me. He basically said, considering the summary judgment motions, that he was going to instruct a jury that they had to consider all the statements made by Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, etc., about voter fraud to be false. There is no way Fox News could have won in a trial with the jury with those instructions. So they had to settle. I mean, and so I'm not a big fan of Fox News, because I do think they're kind of uniparty. But on that one, I mean, they didn't do anything wrong. I mean, they did the best they could, and they were not admitting guilt. They had no choice. They could have been put out of business if they had lost a jury trial.
Yeah, well, and again, it would be one thing if the judge had said, that these haven't been proven in a court of law, or it's a theory, but it hasn't been proven. But to physically say that it's false and that you have to assume it's false in figuring out this judgment, again, to me seems completely unethical, not factually accurate at all. But it just goes to show how the establishment really can rig the system and use technicalities in order to push the particular agenda. And then look at how the mainstream media responded to that court case. They used that in order to smear Tucker Carlson, smear Fox News, smear anybody who was talking about election fraud. See, even Fox News, the conservative talking news organization, is even admitting defeat. Like, that was the narrative that was coming out of it, and then they use it to smear all the rest of us that just have legitimate questions about what happened during the election.
And don't get me started about what the definition of evidence is. Okay, first of all, in Georgia, what did they say? There's like 1,500 people have come forth with affidavits, of wrongdoing that they saw. and courts won't even care. They won't consider it. That is considered evidence. Witness testimony is evidence. And all this evidence that we have, here in Arizona of things like ballots being counted and tabulated too fast for humans to even, conceive of, that is evidence. And it doesn't matter that the stupid judge says, well, Stephen Richer said it was okay that they were approving the ballots that fast, so I just got to go with that. I mean, what that is an abrogation of the rule of law. That is destroying the rule of law. That judge is not looking at absolutely solid 100% evidence. There's nothing wrong with that evidence. It's really clear that no human being can verify signatures going through screens in less than 1 second. Some of them were done as that quickly as a second.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's that. I mean, obviously, there's chain of custody. There's all these different things that I think that are legitimate questions that courts have refused to actually deal with and deal with properly, in my opinion. The other one, and that I could, and this is the one I think I forget if I've talked to you about this one or not before, but out here in California during the recall election of Gavin Newsom, and I was actually the one that broke the story, and then Gateway Pundit picked it up and all that, which was out here in California. We had printed home ballots on printer paper, where if you were, it started off, if you had a disability or were in the military or were out of the country, you could actually print a ballot on printer paper, mail it in, and then they would actually transfer it from printer paper onto a ballot paper. They'd throw away the printed paper and then submit that. So there was no record really of your original ballot, basically. And then during the recall of Gavin Newsom, they basically claimed that every single person in the state of California could print a ballot at home on printer paper if they so chose, because of COVID-19, and thus everybody had a disability in the state of California. So during the recall election of Gavin Newsom, all the polls were saying it was 51-49, 52-48. It was like super close. And so I was like, well, this is not going to be close if they're going to allow this to happen. So I broke the story, and I get a call from the guy who organized the recall movement of Gavin Newsom, who told me to knock it off because he's like, you're going to lose the election for us because you're going to suppress the vote, and people aren't going to turn out to vote if they think it's rigged and all that. And he's like, it's going to be so close. It's going to be like a 1 or 2% margin. And he's like, we can't afford to lose any votes. And I was like, if you think they're going to allow it to be that close, that's insane. It's going to be 65-35, just like it was in the last couple of elections. It's going to be 65-35. I promise you, because they want to make it look like we have zero momentum, even though we had all the momentum. And then guess what happened? I was right. It was 65-35, and then I didn't talk to him again for like 3 years because I was proven right. But nobody will touch this thing. I've talked to representatives in California. I've talked to the GOP. I've talked to everybody. Nobody will touch this because they don't want to be deemed a conspiracy theorist and smeared. And I'm like, this is so easy for them to commit fraud. Like, and then on top of that, you look at the Secretary of State's, the report after the election. They did not separate out mail-in ballots versus printed home ballots. So we have no idea how many printed home ballots they actually submitted in the state of California.
And what makes this worse, and I know we got to go to a break soon, so, but it's just the fact that there were some people early on who were kind of sloppy investigating election fraud because, I mean, come on, most of us are just a bunch of scrappy grassroots activists, so, and we're just thinking our friends and family are going to be looking at our work. We don't realize this stuff is going to go viral all over the country. So people make mistakes. And so then the left just constantly holds up those mistakes over and over and over again and says, this is why you're conspiracy theorists, because you all got proven false. And in reality, it's just a few people who were sloppy, who were early on. But I think that's why you appreciate my reporting. I mean, I am just an ultra perfectionist, and there is a lot of stuff I will not report on because I don't see enough evidence to put my name and reputation out there and cover it. And, God bless all the other people who want to delve into that stuff. But if I don't see enough concrete proof for myself, then I'm not going to go out there. I've never been sued for libel, and I don't want to be sued for libel. So, those of us in the movement who, really are on top of things, we have to be so careful, and it takes extra time, but I feel like we don't have a choice.
Yeah. Well, there's so many people that throw out all different kinds of theories, and I think it's part of the problem with the conservative alternative media is that people have to say the most outrageous things in order to get views, in order to get clicks. And I'm like, but do you actually believe it's true, or do you think it's just going to drive a bunch of hits? And I think that, and again, I saw the same thing with election fraud as I saw with COVID. There was all sorts of absolutely unprovable claims that were made about COVID jabs, and I always go back to this because to me it's so obvious. There's so many insane claims that were made, like the government now owns your body because you got an mRNA jab, and you just you go down the rabbit hole. I'm like, but I need actual evidence. Like I need not just something taken out of context or you read into this. I need some sort of evidence to where I can make some sort of logical conclusion that, yeah, you know what, this could actually be true. But I'm always cautious because I always tell everybody I have kind of four different buckets in my mind. One is things that I know are true and I know are false. There's very little that actually goes in those buckets. Almost everything else goes into the two middle buckets, which is I think this is probably true or I think this is probably false. There's very little that when you actually sit down and you actually think about it, that you can say 100% this is true or 100% this is false. Most of it is just a shade of one or the other. And for me, I just have to look at the evidence. I'm like, so which way does this take me? And then I kind of go from there. But I'm not so arrogant to think that I have all the answers and that I can say 100% certainty that I'm right in every single scenario.
Well, I got to tell you, Jeff, from talking to you about COVID, you're going to be my go-to person because I like when you said that about how the government's going to control your body. I saw the posts out there, and like I didn't know what to think about them, but I didn't, I wasn't going to investigate it. It sounded kind of too crazy, but I mean, if you're the go-to guy for like this is probably accurate with a COVID jab, it's good to know.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, and like that, like that's the thing is like to me, the easiest thing with COVID jabs is just to look at, shedding is a provable thing that actually happens. And it takes away my ability to consent to some sort of technology that goes inside of my body. And so because that to me, that would be the easiest way to pull the COVID jabs off the market, is because you're taking away somebody else's consent and informed consent to have something in their body. I feel like there's certain like basic things that you could look at without going down into all these crazy conspiracy theories and all these things that are just so outlandish that are unprovable in court. Like to me, that's something that's provable. It's scientifically proven. So that to me should be able to hold up. And I feel like the same thing could be said about certain aspects of election fraud. There's certain things that it's like you can't refute. Focus on those, not the most outlandish, China hacked this computer and did this and whatever it is that nobody's actually going to understand. Focus on the basics. And I think that's where I think a lot of people in our movement go wrong, but also the basics don't drive clicks. And that's the thing. So we're going to go ahead and go to a break really quick, and then we'll come back with our last segment here in just a minute.
The Sat123, the satellite phone store, and the amazing team over at this amazing website. It is everything that you need for preparation, everything that you need when the power goes out, when the storm comes, whether it's a generator to keep the power on, solar panels, a satellite phone. If we lose power and the towers go down and 5G, 4G, 3G, it's not working, these satellite phones are absolutely critical in getting in touch with loved ones, and they can actually be a blessing to an entire community. There's so many stories that Tina, the owner and founder of Satellite Phone Store tells about communities that have one satellite phone that was used to help hundreds of families redirect traffic, direct people to a safe a place or a place to escape a fire or a natural disaster. I mean, the stories are absolutely amazing. And not only can you protect your own family, but you can also be a blessing to your community when you are prepared. Please go to sat123.com/joy. That is sat123.com/joy. That is my page. And the folks at Satellite Phone Store always have amazing deals for the Shannon Joy audience. 10% off with that promo code JOY. That's 10% off your entire purchase with the promo code JOY. Everything that you need when the lights go out. The Faraday collection, the satellite phones, the generators, you name it, they have it. And we're so thankful for everything that they do for this show. So sat123.com/joy. I also love Native Path Complete Protein, also 41% off. Go to completeprotein.com/joy. Native Path Complete Protein /joy, 100% grass-fed beef protein, not whey, not soy, not plant-based, okay? They don't do that over at Native Path. Only the best for the Joy audience. This is to rebuild strength, maintain muscle support, a fast metabolism with absolutely no bloat whatsoever, because this is the cleanest product, the highest quality product, protein product you can get on the market. It is 110 calories, 20 grams packed with protein, and 0 sugar, dairy-free, no soy, no gluten. This is an amazing product. 41% off. Next week, we're going to feature some of the Joy family recipes. We use complete protein every day at my house. The kids love the chocolate flavor. Go to nativepathcompleteprotein.com/joy. That's nativepathcompleteprotein.com/joy to get your exclusive 41% off discount. This is just for the Joy audience, but it is going to end soon. So make sure you go to that website today.
Hey guys, we are back. Make sure, as we go into this last segment, number one, make sure you guys are just posting in the live chat any questions or anything like that. We'll keep an eye on it, and I'll ask Rachel your questions. But also make sure you guys are going over and you guys are signing up for Pickaxe, which is the social media platform that I launched. You guys can actually watch Shannon Joy Show live every single day on Pickaxe as well. We're the only social media platform that integrates Rumble directly, both on the web version and in the app. The app's going to be coming out here in the next few weeks. We're going to be the only social media platform that actually fully integrates with Rumble, both on the web and in the app. So that way you guys can tune in, you guys can watch, you can be directly there on Pickaxe. And we've got a whole bunch of other ways we're going to be integrating Rumble into our platform as well. In order to help cross promote, help support other free speech platforms as well, but then also make it easy for shows like Shannon's show to be able to be seen and watched and viewed and help to build up her audience on our platform. So if you guys are not on Pickaxe, go to pickaxe.com today, set up your account, and then you guys can actually follow Shannon Joy. You guys can also follow X American News, which carries Shannon Joy's show on Pickaxe. So make sure that you guys are doing that. So we're gonna go ahead and bring up back on Rachel here for the final segment of the show. But I think that for me, the big issue that we're really dealing with moving forward is how do we get a lot of this information to the everyday people? Because the more and again, I always say I may be biased and I may be jaded because I live in communist California, so I'm absolutely surrounded by lefties. But as I talk to just everyday people, they have no idea any of the things that we're talking about today because the mainstream media doesn't report it. ChatGPT is not going to talk about it. Grok's not going to talk about it. And the algorithms, even if you're on a platform like X that again claims to be free speech, the algorithms are designed in order to kind of put you into an echo chamber because it's all based upon the things that you like and the things that you engage with. So the everyday people are not going to get this information, which is why I think we need to spend more time actually educating ourselves so that way we can have more one-on-one conversations with other people and our friends and our family, because that's really the only way to actually get this information out there.
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. Having been a journalist for many years and trying to get my articles out there, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I mean, I think you are going to have to do the cross-platform. So, like you were incorporating Rumble into Pickaxe. I mean, I post my articles, I almost complain about it. Like, it's like a half an hour process every day to go post one of my articles on all these different platforms. But you never know, who you're going to reach or what effect it's going to have. I post my articles on 4 next door groups every day, and all kinds of things have happened. I just gave a speech to a group that found me on those next door posts. So you have to do all these different platforms. It's frustrating, and if you have money, I'm sure you can pay somebody to do it, or there's some programs out there that'll do it for you. But that's one way. The other way, I hate to say it, but it's money. I spend a lot of my time now pitching GOP billionaires for funding for various projects. And, look at the most successful people, Trump and Elon Musk. What is the one thing that they definitely have in common? A lot of money. So I think our side, because media is a dying business, there's less than half as many journalists now as there were in 2006. This industry is being devastated. Most people I know who are journalists, my friends, they're not even making a living. They're just doing it for free. It's a labor of love, and I don't think people realize it's gotten that bad. And conservative media is the worst. I mean, the left has got all these Soros organizations that fund their big news outlets. We don't really have much like that. There's not very many people out there funding conservative media. So in order to spread the message, we can't just rely on a little conservative outlet anymore. And it does mean going over to the dark side. In my opinion, I think we need to try to get op-eds placed in these big MSM publications. If the Los Angeles Times will let you run an op-ed, I think you should. And I'm not a big fan of Fox News, but they do have the most amazing following. They're still extremely popular. I mean, I just found an article that somebody wrote about me back when I was on Fox and Friends. Like, all I did was go on Fox and Friends, and somebody from a regular MSM site wrote an entire article about me. So I think we still need to just kind of play nice, and those of us who can stomach it, go on Fox News when we can, because that's and I know you're not a big fan of X, but I make decent money off of X, and X does promote my account. So those of us who can deal with X, we need to utilize that as much as we can as well, in my opinion, just because it's just another way of getting the word out.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things we have to use every opportunity that we have at our disposal in order to do that. Like, I think it was about a month or two ago, I wrote an op-ed, and Newsweek ended up picking it up, and I'm like, I was shocked that Newsweek picked it up. But it was really interesting. It was kind of ironic because my first major hit piece came from Newsweek, and then they post my op-ed, which was kind of ironic. But I think it also goes to show that, like, there are opportunities for people outside of the mainstream narrative to actually get our work seen by the mainstream and be seen by everyday people as well. And we have to take every advantage that we can, whether it is X or being on whatever platform you have to be on, or like people there's still conservatives that are on YouTube because YouTube hasn't banned them yet. Like, take advantage of what you can. But I think one of the things that you talked about right there that I think is really important, that I don't think a lot of people understand, is that for especially writers and journalists, but this also goes for a lot of different creators in general and influencers and whatever it is since I would say since probably 2022, and I've learned this diving into the tech side of things, building up Pickaxe, is that since 2022 the algorithms have changed drastically on these social media platforms, and to where they've done this, number one, in order to control narratives, and so they only promote trusted sources and mainstream outlets and things like that on a lot of these platforms. But the other side of it is that they make it almost impossible for a lot of people to actually earn revenue unless you play the game that platform is promoting. And so there's a lot of very talented writers that basically, like you said, it's a labor of love because they can't monetize. Like, if you're on these platforms, you can't promote a promo code anymore because you get demoted in the algorithms and your stuff will never be seen. It's very difficult unless you can have a post go viral or something like that to grow a big audience to earn revenue on a lot of these different platforms. And I think that's the concern that I have, and that has really fueled me kind of building up Pickaxe as well, is learning just how difficult it is for a lot of these people that are super talented to be able to fund their work, because we need to figure out how to fund their work if they're going to spend the time to investigate all these things that need exposing. And I think that's what people are missing right now. George Soros throws money everywhere. All these lefty groups, they throw money everywhere. We don't have that on the right in the same way as they do, and we've got to figure out how to combat that.
And we're never going to get it in the area of voter fraud. Holy cow! Do you think any of these GOP billionaires, want to fund it? No, they're on the other side. They don't want people looking at voter fraud. So, I sat there and debated Grok for hours and hours and hours, but, other than the advertising revenue I get from X, I mean, I'm not getting paid to do that. And it's sad because there's hardly anybody out there like me who could debate all that. I write 6 articles a week. I've written so many about Arizona's election fraud that I'm the right person to debate it. But no one's going to pay me to do that. I mean, I'll just get banned. I mean, there's a major network, I won't name who they are, But they stopped inviting me on, after the election fraud became a big deal because nobody wants to talk about it. And it doesn't matter, my credibility, the fact that I was a Maricopa County elections attorney and no one ever has accused me of making a big mistake when it comes to election fraud. It doesn't matter. It's persona non grata. Not allowed to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. No, yeah, and it's crazy. It doesn't matter what your background is. It just matters what you're talking about is really all that it comes down to. Because I mean, again, like you're extremely credible. Like you have the expertise, you have the background, you have the job description to be able to support. Like maybe Rachel has an idea of what she's talking about. It was interesting. I think it was yesterday. I saw Naomi Wolf was talking about weather manipulation, and then there was a bunch of lefty accounts that were running around saying how she's fringe and way outside the box and a conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, you do realize she was an advisor for Clinton and Al Gore, right? Like, it's not like she's just some like right wing, conservative. What like she was pretty high up in the Democrat Party and actually advising Al Gore, who's now the ultimate climate change guy. I would say she's probably not fringe. She probably has a better idea of what's going on than you do, being around those kind of people. And it to me, it goes to show it doesn't matter who you are. It just matters what you're saying, and then that defines whether or not you're crazy or a kook or whatever it is.
And let me just go back to like the mainstream media bias and expertise. One of my pet peeves that makes me so angry is every time I read an MSM article which says, the insurrection or the insurrectionist, even though they say this, even though not a single J6 protester was ever convicted of insurrection. That is, to me, as a former prosecutor and lawyer, that is despicable. That is disgusting, and they don't know what they're talking about. So when they start, blaring about there was no election fraud, these low-level journalists who don't have law degrees, have never prosecuted, have never been a Maricopa County elections attorney, I just want to scream. But these types of journalists, they're the ones who are going to get on all the big media shows. These are the ones who are going to get quoted. These are the ones when I debate Grok, they're going to parrot what these morons are saying back to me. And I just get so upset. Meanwhile, I'm marginalized. I'm barely making it. I get a regular journalist pay, and I'm never going to probably ever be more popular than this because I dare to talk about election wrongdoing.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, and I think that again, it goes to show that taking it full circle back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, it's like when you have Grok and these AI platforms relying on the narratives that are in the mainstream media and those talking points, like you mentioned about the insurrection or about election fraud, and they're relying on that and deeming that as credible as what it's drawing its sources from, that's concerning because of how many people are relying on these platforms and these AI platforms for their information. I know so many people that they don't even do Google searches anymore. They just ask Grok or ChatGPT to do the search for them, and then they just trust it as if that's the arbiter of truth. It's crazy.
Well, and getting right back to media there, it's incredible to me how, because like Google has incorporated AI into its searches, like the first result when you do a search is the AI answer, it's decimating the MSM. Because now people can just go and look at that short little AI result, and they don't even have to go to the article. And I just found an article the other day that was discussing, somebody claimed that Politico's traffic was down 50%. Now, I don't think it was that bad, but it's destroying the MSM. AI is actually destroying the MSM. So while it's ironic, while AI is parodying the MSM, it's also destroying them in the process.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's also destroying like everyday bloggers and people like that as well. And I think that's the hard part of figuring out how we deal with AI, because it's like on one hand, it's collecting all that information and all those articles, whether it's mainstream or just a Joe Schmo blogger, whatever it is, and combining it and then basically cutting out the revenue that person can earn from SEO by just providing the answer right then and there, right up at the top, so nobody actually needs to go click on the link. And I know a bunch of bloggers and a bunch of writers that have just shut down their blog because they're like, I can't earn a revenue anymore specifically because of that Google AI.
Wow, I didn't even realize it was getting that bad. I mean, as a conservative journalist, it affects me, I don't think, as much as the MSM. And that might be why, because, Google cut me out in probably 2012. Like, you can't find my articles in Google News anymore. I mean, so we've already been, screwed out of that. So when the whole AI thing popped up with Google, it has absolutely zero effect on me in that aspect. But you're right. And, the thing I find so fascinating is how AI is actually replacing these journalists. I don't know if you've seen my post, but I'll be like, okay, generate an article in the style of the New York Times about how Trump is doing horrible things on the border. And it will. I've read enough of the New York Times, not much anymore, but I've read enough over the years that, I can look at that AI generated article and then I can look at a New York Times article. I couldn't tell the difference. So AI is, writing all those journalists out of jobs, whereas with us conservative journalists, we at least have some more time because they do not know how to parrot us very well, and they especially don't know how to do the investigative stuff. They just take from what other people have written. So if Rachel Alexander wants to go and write about a key interview with a local political in Arizona, they can't do that yet.
Yeah, well, I think the difference specifically there is like the left and the mainstream media, I don't think I could name you a single New York Times reporter, right? But I could tell if it's a New York Times article, right? Because it's the credibility of the outlet is why people are reading it, not necessarily because of who's actually writing it. And I think that's why they can get away with the AI, whereas somebody like yourself who's actually writing, like people I think a lot of people are actually reading your articles or reading your content because they follow you and they trust you. And the same goes for a lot of other conservative writers, is they're following because they trust that person. So it would be a lot more difficult to incorporate the AI and use the AI to kind of cut yourself out, whereas the New York Times or the Washington Post or whoever it is, they could easily do that and their readership would really not be able to tell the difference.
Well, and not to get into the weeds, but this might be helpful for some of your fellow conservative journalists. I feel like with journalism dying, we all have to adapt. And, there's this mainstream media journalist here. You probably know who he is, Data Guru. He's the only journalist in the state who has close to as many followers as I do. And he always slams me and calls me grifting because I'm trying to, post engaging content and things. And I explained to him back, it's not grifting, it's called adapting. And you're a moron if you're not doing it yourself because you're going to be out of job.
Yeah.
The way for conservative journalists to survive now is you do have to become sort of a figure where people want to go to for their news. Look at how everybody goes to Tucker Carlson for their news. Look at how everybody goes to Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly. I mean, people have, you can call them influencers, whatever. I associate influencer more with the woman who takes her clothes off and shows her behind on Instagram, right? Conservative influencers are nothing like that. I think we as journalists have to build up a name brand if we want to survive. We have to get paid subscribers, we have to get, viewers and clicks. And so, yeah, I think that's how we outsmart the dying mainstream media. They're all, oh, I don't ever want to put an opinion out, even though they do, they try to disguise it. They don't try to create these personalities, and they're just writing themselves out of a job.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and again, that probably even goes to a certain degree to their worldview because they have a much more socialistic worldview and socialistic outlook, to where it's not about the individual, it's about the group, it's about the bigger picture and all that kind of stuff. Whereas we are very individualistic, and I think to a certain degree that can play to both our advantage and their advantage and disadvantage on both sides. Like there's pluses and minuses to both mentalities from that kind of specific standpoint. So any closing thoughts as we're kind of wrapping up here, after again talking to everything from AI to lawfare to election fraud to all that kind of stuff? From your perspective, what's the big takeaway?
So actually, can I focus on something more narrow that I wrote down?
Yep.
So you brought up a super good point, which was that there are some of these fringe election conspiracy theories, and you pointed out, one of them is like the foreign hacking, right? So I've seen all the, presentations about how there was foreign hacking. And the one thing I've found lacking in them is they just never show the actual evidence, the nuts and bolts. Here's the IP address and here's how we traced it. I never see that type of information. And I think that's because they don't have it. Like, how are they going to get that information when the governments aren't going to turn it over? So what I think is going on, and I was just on a show a week ago, We the People, AZ Alliance, and one of their experts that they had on, he made a very good point. He said it takes just one single programmer to change election results. And so some investigative journalism that I have done related to that was in the 2024 most recent election here, where Carrie Lake allegedly lost. And what I think may have happened there was that situation. Because, and I've written an entire article about it. People can go to, I think that one was posted at WND. It's one of my last articles I ever wrote there. It basically shows how this no-name Green Party candidate in the primary, he spent no money. He had like 300 followers on Twitter, and he got like 250 votes, right? So in the general election, this no-name guy gets over 60,000 votes. He got way more than Jill Stein did, the presidential candidate, who is pretty well known. I believe the votes, 60,000 votes from Kerry, were flipped to that Green Party guy, and nobody will talk about it. Nobody will do anything about it. I'm the only journalist in the entire country who's ever even written about it, and thank God that WND published my article.
Yeah. No, I remember watching that. We did an election special, watching that live, and I remember watching that. I'm like, they're rigging that one against Carrie Lake. You could see the tallies. You go back and watch our election special. I was calling that from the second I saw those tallies. I'm like, there's no way that you would have people vote for Donald Trump and then vote for a Green Party candidate. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. So tell everybody, Rachel, obviously, where they can find you, where they can read all of your articles, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I got to admit, I spend all my time on X, so Rach_IC, but, I post everything on Pickaxe, so go there as well. And then my personal website, intellectualconservative.com, I post my articles there. And then my daily job is with the Arizona Sun-Times. So you can either go there or just, pick up my articles from Arizona Sun-Times from, Intellectual Conservative or Pickaxe or wherever.
Perfect. That sounds good, Rachel. It's always a blast talking to you. Thanks for coming on, and can't wait to do it again.
I appreciate it so much. Have a blessed day.
No, you as well. And everybody, again, make sure that you guys are going and following Rachel again on X. You guys can also follow her on Pickaxe. And I think especially in light of some of the stuff we were talking about when it came to AI and social media and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that we're really trying to do with Pickaxe is make a very human-centered social media platform as well. But also we're trying to find ways to help creators and writers and journalists to be able to monetize their content and overcome a lot of those obstacles that Rachel was talking about. So we've got, like a revenue share model. We've got an innovative a way to incorporate affiliate advertising in ways that no other social media platform out there is doing. We're incorporating all these different things in order to help people to get their voice back, amplify their voice, get their message out there, but then also be able to support themselves and monetize their content in new and innovative ways. And so, one of the things that, again, as we're kind of closing, is really consider jumping over to Pickaxe, help us to grow this platform, and then we can help voices like Rachel and Shannon Joy, and we've got Dr. Mary Talley Bowden on there, Naomi Wolf is on there, Daily Clout, Children's Health Defense. A lot of our favorite people are already over there, and a lot more are joining here in the coming weeks as we're getting closer to our app launch. So if you guys do that, you guys can follow, and you guys can actually find new ways to actually support these people. Whether you become a paid subscriber or check out the products that they promote, and that's one way that you can actually support the work of these really, really good journalists. And again, whether you agree with Rachel's assessment or not when it comes to election fraud or any issue, to me, that's irrelevant. The issue comes down to how do we get more voices to have more conversations, and then let's actually get in there. And if you disagree with somebody, debate them, discuss it. Let's actually bring back two-way conversation, which is something that's sorely lacking. So again, highly encourage you guys, go check out pickaxe.com. You guys can follow the Shannon Joy Show over there, catch every single episode on Pickaxe. Make sure you guys are doing that. But that's it for today. I truly appreciate everyone tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'll be guest hosting again. My good friend Karen Kingston, the former Pfizer employee, is joining me. We're going to be talking a lot about HHS, mRNA vaccines, the whole deal. So make sure you guys are tuning in tomorrow. Same time, same place, and we will catch you guys then. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We shall catch you guys next time.